Hi guys, welcome back again. I am here for this video for another chapter of Tress of the Emerald Sea. Um, Depending on how things go, I might try to read maybe like more than one, because I'm really enjoying it. I know it's been kind of slow progress, so thank you to everybody who's been sticking with me through all of this. It's not for lack of desire. I definitely really want to read this book. In fact, I'm having a hard time just not like going ahead and just reading it on my own, because I really want to know what's going to happen. But I'm trying my hardest to stay committed to sharing this experience with you guys. So I'm having to stop myself from reading ahead, but I'm really excited to get into chapter 3 and see what happens next. So I'm going to stop the preamble and I'm just going to go ahead and start reading chapter 3, which is called The Duke. Tress had noticed that a nice pair of gloves made her daily work go so much better. Now she meant the good kind of gloves, made of a soft leather that molds to your hands as you use them, the kind that, if you oil them well and don't leave them out in the sun, don't ever grow stiff. The kind that are so comfortable you go to wash your hands and are surprised to find you're still wearing them. The perfect set of gloves is invaluable, and Charlie was like a good set of gloves. The longer she spent with him, the more right their time together felt. The brighter even the moon shadows were, and easier her burdens became. She did love interesting cups, but a part of that was because each one gave her an excuse to come and visit him. The thing growing between them felt so good, so wonderful, that Tress was frightened to call it love. From the way the other youths talked, love was dangerous. Their love seemed to be about jealousy and insecurity. It was about passionate shouting matches and more passionate reconciliations. Teenagers be like that, don't they? It was less like a good pair of gloves and more like hot coal that would burn your hands. Love had always frightened Tress, but when Charlie put his hand on hers again, she felt heat, the fire she'd always feared. The coal was in there after all, just contained, like in a good stove. She wanted to leap into his heat, all logic discarded. Charlie froze. They'd touched many times before, of course, but this was different. This moment, this dream. He blushed, but let his hand linger. Then he finally raised it and ran his fingers through his hair, grinning sheepishly. Because he was Charlie, that didn't spoil the moment, but instead, it only made it more sweet. Tress searched for the perfect thing to say. There were any number of lines that would have capitalized on that moment. She could have said, Charlie, could you hold this for me while I walk around the grounds? And then offered her hand back to him. She could have said, Help, I can't breathe. Staring at you has taken my breath away. She could even have said something completely insane, such as, I like you. Instead, instead she said, hands are warm. She followed it with a laugh that she choked on halfway through, exactly mimicking by pure chance the call of an elephant seal. That's really how it is when you're in love, isn't it? It might be said that Tress had a way with words, in that her words tended to get in her way. In response, Charlie gave her a wonderful smile, more and more confident the longer it lasted. It was one she'd never seen before. It said, I think I love you, Tress, elephant seal notwithstanding. She smiled back at him. Then over his shoulder she saw the Duke standing in the window. Tall and straight, the man wore military-style clothing that looked like it had been pinned to him by the various medals on his breast. He was not smiling. Indeed, she'd seen him smile only once, during the punishment of old Lotari. who'd tried to sneak off the island by stowing away on a merchant ship. That seemed the Duke's sole smile. Perhaps Charlie had used the entire family's quota. Nevertheless, if the Duke did have just one smile, he made up for it by displaying far too many teeth. That's unsettling. The Duke faded into the shadows of the house, but his presence loomed over Tress as she bade farewell to Charlie. On her way down the steps, she expected to hear shouting. Instead, an ominous silence followed her, the tense silence that came after a lightning flash. It chased her down the path and around to her home, where she murmured something to her parents about being tired. She went to her room and waited for the silence to end, for the soldiers to knock, then demand to know why the girl who washed the windows had dared to touch the Duke's son. When nothing like that came, she dared hope that she was reading too much into the Duke's expression. Then she remembered the Duke's singular smile. After that, worries nipped at her all night. She rose early in the morning, rustled her hair into a tail, then trudged to the market. Here she'd sort through the day-old goods and near-spoiled ingredients for something she could afford. Despite the early hour, the market was abuzz with activity. Men swept dead spores off the path while people gathered in chattering knots. Tress braced herself for the news, then decided nothing could be worse than the awful anticipation she'd suffered all night. She was wrong. The Duke had sent out a declaration. He and his family were going to leave the island that very day. Guys, that was way too short. I'm going to read chapter 4. Chapter 4 is called The Sun. Leave. Leave the island? People didn't leave the island. Tress knew logically that it wasn't explicitly true. Royal officials could leave. The Duke left on occasion to report to the king. Plus, he'd earned all those fancy medals by killing people from a distant place where they looked slightly different. He'd apparently been quite heroic during those wars. You could tell because a great number of his troops had died while he lived. But in the past, the Duke had never taken his family. The ducal heir has come of age, the proclamation announced, and so we shall present him for betrothal to the various princesses of the civilized seas. Now, Tress was a pragmatic young woman, and so she only thought about ripping her shopping baskets to shreds in frustration. She's stronger than me. She merely deliberated whether it would be appropriate to swear at the top of her lungs. She barely considered marching up to the Duke's mansion to demand he change his mind. Instead, she went about her shopping in a numb haze, using the familiar action to give her suddenly crumbling life a semblance of normality. She found some garlic she was certain she could salvage, several potatoes that hadn't withered too badly, and even some grain where the weevils were large enough to pick out. Yesterday, she'd have been pleased with this haul. Today, she couldn't think of anything but Charlie. It seemed so incredibly unfair. She'd only just acknowledged what she felt for him, and already everything was turning upside down. Yes, she'd been told to expect this pain. Love involved pain. But that was the salt in your tea. Wasn't there supposed to be a dab of honey? Wasn't there supposed to be, dared she wish, passion? She was to receive all of the detriments of a romantic affair with none of the advantages. Unfortunately, her practicality began to assert itself. So long as the two of them had been able to pretend, the real world hadn't been able to claim them. But the days of pretending were over. What had she thought was going to happen? That the Duke would let her marry his son? What did she think she could offer someone like Charlie? She was nothing compared to a princess. Think of how many cups they could afford. In the pretend world, marriage was about love. In the real world, it was about politics. A word laden with a large number of meanings, though most of them boiled down to, this is a matter for nobles, and, begrudgingly, the very rich to discuss, not peasants. She finished her shopping and started up the path toward home, where at least she could commiserate with her parents. But it appeared that the Duke was wasting no time, for she saw a procession snaking down toward the docks. Oh my gosh. She turned around and walked back via a different path, arriving right after the procession, which began to load the family's things onto a merchant ship. Nobody was allowed to leave the island, unless they were, instead, somebody. Tress worried she wouldn't get a chance to speak with Charlie. Then she worried that she would, but he wouldn't actually want to see her. Mercifully, she caught him standing at the side of the crowd, searching among the gathering people. The moment he spotted her, he rushed over. Tress! Oh, moons! I worried I wouldn't find you in time. I. What did she say? Fair maiden, he said, bowing, I must take my leave. Charlie, she said softly, don't try to be someone you aren't. I know you. He grimaced. He was wearing a traveling coat and even a hat. The Duke considered hats improper wear, except during travel. Tress, he said softer, I'm afraid I've lied to you. You see, I'm not the groundskeeper. I'm, the Duke's son. Amazing. Who would have thought that Charlie the groundskeeper and Charles the Duke's heir would be the same person, considering they're the same age, look the same, and wear the same clothing? Yes. Are you angry at me? Anger is in line right now, Tress said. Its seventh down, sandwiched between confusion and fatigue. Behind them, Charlie's father and mother marched up to the ship. Their servants followed with the last of the luggage. Charlie gazed at his feet. It seems I am to be married to a princess of some nation or other. What do you think of that? What should she say? I wish you well. He looked up and met her eyes. Always, Tress. Remember? It was hard for her, but after groping around for a moment, she found the words hiding in a corner, trying to avoid her. I wish, she said, seizing hold of them, that you wouldn't do that. Get married to someone else. Oh? He blinked. Do you really? I mean, I'm sure they're very nice, the princesses. I believe it's part of the job description, Charlie said. Like, have you heard of the things they do in stories? Resuscitate amphibians? Notice for parents that children have wet the bed? One would have to be relatively kind to do those services. Yes, Tress said. She took a deep breath. I would still rather you didn't marry one of them. Well then, I shan't, Charlie said. I don't believe you have a choice, Charlie. Your father wants you married. It's politics. Ah, but you see, I have a secret weapon. He took her hands and leaned in. Behind, his father moved up to the prow of the ship and looked down, scowling. Charlie, however, smiled a lopsided smile. His look how sneaky I am smile. He used it when he wasn't being particularly sneaky. What kind of secret weapon, Charlie? She asked. I can be incredibly boring. That's not a weapon. It might not be one in a war, Tress, he said, but in courtship, it is as fine a weapon as the sharpest rapier. You know how I go on, and on, and on. I like how you go on, Charlie. I don't mind the on, in fact. I sometimes quite enjoy the on. You are a special case, Charlie said. You are, well, this is kind of silly, but you're like a pair of gloves, Tress. I am, she said, choking up. Yes. Don't be offended. I mean, when I have to practice the sword, I wear these gloves and I understand, she whispered. From atop of the ship, Charlie's father shouted for him to be quick. Tress realized then that, like Charlie had different kinds of smiles, his father had different kinds of scowls. She didn't much like what the current one implied about her. Charlie squeezed her hands. Listen, Tress, I promise you, I'm not going to get married. I'm going to go to those kingdoms, and I'm going to be so insufferably boring that none of the girls will have me. I'm not good at much. I've never scored a single point against my father in sparring. I spill my soup at formal dinners. I talk so much, even my footman, who's paid to listen, comes up with creative reasons to interrupt me. The other day I was telling him the story of the fish and the gull, and he pretended to stub his toe, and the Duke shouted again. I can do this, Tress, Charlie insisted. I will do this. At each stop, I'll pick out a cup for you, all right? Once I've bored the current princess to death, and my father has decided we need to move on, I'll send you the cup, as proof, you see. He squeezed her hands once more. I'll do it, not only because you listen, but because you know me, Tress. You've always been able to see me when others don't. He began turning to finally respond to his father's shouts. Tress held on, clinging to his hands, unwilling to let it end. Charlie gave her one last smile, and though he was plainly trying to act confident, she knew his smiles. This was an uncertain one, hopeful but worried. You're my gloves too, Charlie, Tress said to him. After that, she had to let go so he could jog up the plank. She'd imposed enough already. The Duke forced his son below deck as the ship slipped off the dead gray spars nearest the rock and into the true verdant ocean. Wind caught the ship's sails, and it struck out toward the horizon, leaving a wake of disturbed emerald dust behind it. Tress climbed up to her house, then watched from the cliff until the ship was the size of a cup, then the size of a speck. Then it vanished. After that, the waiting began. They say that to wait is the most excruciating of life's torments. They, in this case, refers to writers who have nothing useful to do, so fill their time thinking of things to say. Any working person can tell you that having time to wait is a luxury. Tress had windows to wash, meals to cook, a little brother to watch. Her father, Lem, had never recovered from his accident in the mines, and though he tried to assist, he could barely walk. He helped Tress's mother, Ulba, knit socks all day, which they sold to sailors, but with the expensive yarn, they turned only a meager profit. So Tress didn't wait, she worked. Still, it was an enormous relief when the first cup arrived. It was delivered by Hoyd, the cabin boy. Yes, that's me. What tipped you off? Was it perhaps the name? Is that a character from a different story? I don't know. Talk to me about it in the comments. A beautiful porcelain cup without even a single chip in it. The world brightened that day. Tress could almost imagine Charlie speaking as she read the accompanying letter, which detailed the affections of the first princess. With heroic monotony, he had listed the sounds his stomach made when he lay in various positions at night. As that hadn't been quite enough, he then explained how he kept his toenail clippings and gave them names. That had done it. That would do it for me, honestly. Fight on, my loquacious love, Tress thought, as she scrubbed the mansion's windows the next day. Be brave, my mildly gross warrior. They're so cute. The second cup was of pure red glass, tall and thin, and it looked like it could contain more liquid than it actually did. Perhaps it came from a particularly stingy tavern. He'd put off this princess by explaining what he'd had for breakfast in intricate detail as he'd counted the pieces of the scrambled egg and categorized them by size. The third cup was an enormous solid pewter tankard with heft to it. Perhaps it was from one of those places Charlie had made up where people always needed to carry weapons. Tress was reasonably certain she could knock out an attacker by swinging the tankard. The latest princess hadn't been able to withstand an extended conversation about the benefits of various punctuation marks, including a few Charlie had invented. The fourth package's card included no letter, only a small drawing, two gloved hands holding on to one of them. The cup had a painted butterfly on it with a red ocean underneath. She found it odd that the butterfly wasn't terrified of the spores. Maybe it was a prisoner forced to fly out over the ocean to its doom. The fifth cup never arrived. Tress tried to play it off, telling herself that it must have been interrupted in transit. After all, any number of dangerous things could happen to a ship sailing the spores. Pirates or, spores. But the months stretched long, each more tedious than the one before. Every time a ship arrived at the docks, Tress was there asking for mail. Nothing. She did this for months on end, until an entire year had passed since Charlie had left. Then finally, a note. Not from Charlie, but from his father, sent to the entire town. The Duke was returning to Diggins Point at long last, and he was bringing his wife, his heir, and his new daughter-in-law. Well, that's annoying. Okay, I don't think I have it in me to read another chapter tonight, but I'm definitely going to be back soon because it's getting really good and I'm really interested and I'm excited. But I'm really curious about this. Who is it? The cabin boy? What was his name? Hoyd or something like that. Yeah, his whole that's me. What tipped you off? Is that tell me in the comments. I mean, no spoilers, obviously, but like, is this related to another story or like another character? Because I know there are like some characters that kind of travel between stories, as it were. Um, so yeah, don't spoil anything for me, but like, I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious what your thoughts are. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this, and it's gonna be really hard for me to not just go read this on my own. But I'm gonna try and stick with it. I'm gonna try and read it with you guys. It's really good. I'm really enjoying it. And I can't wait to see what happens to Charlie. But thank you guys for being here again. I'm really excited about the book, and I would love to talk to you guys in the comments if you have any thoughts or anything you want to talk to me about. So leave a comment or a like if you want, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon. Bye.